Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
You can tell a lot about where a company is going by looking at where it's been. ConocoPhillips, Alaska's oil and gas company.
The National Weather Service.
Spica and Mars sandwich the moon. Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Fellow stargazer Marlene Hidalgo will join us to help you find your way around the sky. Dean, you're going to like this week's show.
Why? Do we have an eclipse, transit, an occultation?
Nope. But we have 2 moon-planet scoochies coming up, and best of all, they happen really late at night.
Ooh, how late?
3 a.m. for one of them and 5 a.m. for the other.
All right, just when I'm brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed. Let's check it out. Okay, we have our sky set to Monday, January 20th, facing southeast at 3 in the morning. Stop yawning, James. We have the waning gibbous moon high in the sky and 2 bright stars down and to the left of it.
Wow, it's late. But if you look closely at the 2 stars, the one on top is definitely redder and the one on the bottom is definitely bluer. The red planet Mars is the upper one, and the blue star Spica is down below. Now, we want to watch Mars and Spica over the next couple of nights because the moon is going to head right for them.
Ooh, is the moon going to go in between them?
Let's see. Here's the same time of night, but one day forward, January 21st. Here is January 22nd, and then January 23rd.
What? Did the moon just cover over Spica?
Not quite. Marlene, take us in for a closer look.
We're zoomed in now, like if we were looking through a pair of binoculars. Mars is on the top, Spica at the bottom, and the moon is just above Spica. Wow, that was a close call. Of course, Spica is way farther away than the moon, and they are only appearing to line up. The moon is just under 240,000 miles away, while Spica is 263 light years away. Earlier, we watched how the moon moves from night to night across the sky. Now, check out how the moon moves from minute to minute. When we zoom in more, we'll see that the moon is just a ½ degree from Spica. Watch what happens when we move time forward in 30-minute chunks. Here is 3:30 a.m., 4 a.m., 4:30, and 5 a.m. Every hour, the moon shifts about ½ a degree, or its own width. And you can really notice this when the moon goes close to a bright star like Spica.
In addition to the Mars-Moon-Spica sandwich on January 23rd, we have another planetary close encounter with the moon also in the morning.
I see it's now 5 a.m. on January 23rd, and the moon is still really close to Spica. Down and to the left of the moon is another planet, the ring planet Saturn. The moon should head Saturn's way over the next couple of nights.
Exactly. Here is January 24th and January 25th.
Wow, that's another close one.
The moon will be just a little over 1½ degrees to the right of Saturn.
Can we zoom in?
Of course.
Here we have Saturn and the moon in the same field of view. Saturn is over 900 million miles away. That's almost 4,000 times farther than the moon. We can see Saturn at that distance because it's so huge. You could fit over 33 moons across the diameter of Saturn, and that doesn't even include the rings. The sunlight reflects off Saturn's massive surface and the gorgeous rings and bounces all the way back to your eyes.
While we're up this late, how about one more?
Aren't you tired yet?
No way, not with all this action in the sky. It's now 6 a.m. and we're facing southeast. The moon and Saturn are still next to each other, but look over there, low in the sky.
That bright object is Venus, and it has now become the morning star.
If we go forward a few more days, will the moon get close to it?
Let's see. Here's January 26, January 27, and January 28.
Aha! When you watch the skies long enough, you start to figure it out.
And more importantly, can I go to bed now?
Sure. It's all there when you
Keep looking up.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with a late start to Alaska weather, but here we go, 16th after January, and as always, we encourage you to visit our website at arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office in Alaska on Twitter, on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and on YouTube. In the afternoon, you get the daily briefing, which is just the surface charts. And then, following this show on alaskapublic.org, you can find the complete broadcast, or just go to YouTube and search for AKWX TV. Off we go now. Hazardous weather. Things have settled down a little bit in southeast with an advisory there around Hyder and some of the higher terrain in the extreme southeastern parts of southeast. We have high wind warnings now in effect for parts of the eastern Kenai and the Portage Valley. That will continue through tomorrow there with wind gusts that could reach anywhere from 80 to 90 miles per hour, and that some of that high wind will likely wrap into the upper hillside of the Anchorage Bowl there, including parts of Turnagain Arm. So wind gusts there may be fairly strong throughout the daytime tomorrow. Dense fog advisories for the Matanuska Valley and parts of the Anchorage Bowl will continue through the evening hours before lifting later on tonight, after which, of course, the winds will kick in. We have a number of winter weather advisories and blizzard watches for parts of the interior. Looking a little bit farther north, blizzard watches there for the Brooks Range and parts into the Noatak and Kobuk valleys. Also blizzard watch conditions there for the Chukchi Sea coast and the Arctic coast between Wainwright and Point Hope. For the Seward Peninsula, winter storm watches and warnings are in effect right now. Some places down into the lower and middle Yukon valleys are expecting anywhere from 5 to 10 inches of snow. You're under a winter storm warning there from Norton Sound all the way through McGrath, or west of McGrath, I should say, through Grayling, out toward Hooper Bay and the Bethel area. Looking farther south and west, and blizzard warnings were in effect earlier this afternoon for parts of the eastern Aleutians, including Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky, and blizzard conditions are certainly possible around the Pribilofs there. We'll be watching that, with northerly winds that could kick up to about 50 miles per hour during the daytime tomorrow. So watch for pretty bad weather here across the west, and it's not so much the falling snow as much as it is the blowing snow. Maybe 3 to 5 inches of snow isn't so bad in St. Paul and eastern parts of the Aleutians, but when you kick in that wind, it could get pretty bad with very poor visibility. Here's a look at the Bering Sea now, and as you'll notice, a lot of low clouds here, but the main issues are the giant swirl here and the continued train of moisture coming in from eastern Asia. Watch as this goes into motion. You can see the track of the low getting very close to the eastern Aleutians. This will likely move its way up into the Bristol Bay region as we head toward the end of the week. We've got another low and yet another one back behind that across the North Pacific. So a very active pattern that we can expect to continue not only into the beginning of the week, the weekend, but probably into next week as well. So very warm, wet, and unsettled weather for a large part of Alaska, and not just the southern third or southeast at this point. You'll notice several areas of low pressure on the back side of this circulation here. These are feeding into the colder flow coming off of the eastern parts of Russia. And if you thought about what's going on, perhaps in the lower 48, they're talking about another round of cold. We're on the opposite side of that pattern, as you'll see in the jet stream here in a moment. With low pressure working its way northward here, you'll have continued opportunities for periods of heavy rain in Prince William Sound. And with that, we expect as much as 3 to 5 inches of rain to be widespread around Prince William Sound. But there may be some isolated cases that work upwards to 6 to even 9 inches of rain. Well, in Prince William Sound, this is also one of our snowiest parts, of perhaps even the entire world in some cases, around Valdez and out toward Yakutat and the Wrangell St. Elias. With that, we could see some pretty heavy snow melt. We're putting a lot of rain on top of that snow. For right now, southeast is catching a little bit of a break. It looks like some of that rain will be headed your way later on into the weekend there, so plan on some very wet conditions there and probably some heavier snowfall eventually for northern parts of the Chilcoot and White Pass, especially at higher terrain. Higher terrain may not be excused entirely from some of the heavy wet snow, but it will be a heavy wet snow, especially in the southern third. Now, a lot of this moisture is also making its way into the interior, and tonight and tomorrow, there may be some opportunities for some snow in places like Fairbanks and into Fort Yukon and points north. So again, blizzard watches and warnings and winter weather advisories that are current right now. A lot of things to be expected and changing across the central, western, and northern parts of Alaska, too. Low pressure right now sitting across the eastern parts of Prince William Sound. A weak area of low pressure will continue to work its way toward southeast, and just a few scattered areas of rainfall late this afternoon. A front had made its way up around the Alaska Range and was focusing some snow around the Fairbanks area out toward Eagle and just north of Northway. Got a cold front trying to drop in across the Arctic coast, and the frontal boundary snakes its way across the YK Delta and out toward the Pribilofs with blowing snow and snow falling. And we were seeing similar conditions there across Dutch Harbor with the low pressure system sitting just south of the eastern chain, a 953 millibar low with snow, or rain I should say, across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Here's a look at tonight, and low pressure continues to strengthen south of the Shumagon Islands and the Alaska Peninsula. This is still working its way northward, the triple point indicating the crossover between the warm air and the cold air overrunning that. We were seeing freezing rain potential across south and western Alaska all the way into McGrath and perhaps into the Kuskokwim Valley there and points northward. Bethel could be included in that. It doesn't look like a great deal of ice, but it does look like it could certainly put down some ice on the cold surfaces there. For many areas southward, it's going to be rain and perhaps even heavy rain developing, including areas around Kodiak and Prince William Sound and even south central Alaska, with southeast looking at another opportunity of rain overnight. Warmer air will continue working its way northward. Ahead of that, scattered snow showers for parts of the upper Yukon, including Fairbanks and points westward down the Yukon and lower mid-Yukon Valley. Some of that could become heavier snowfall. And again, winter storm warnings are posted for many parts of the Norton Sound communities and the lower and mid-Yukon valleys. Cold air will drop southward fairly quickly toward Kaktovik, but high pressure will start to break that frontal boundary apart fairly quickly. But after that happens, the winds crank up, and you'll see that in the marine forecast in just a little bit. Some very strong winds developing there, and also a pretty tight pressure gradient here across the Bering Strait and points north. Should create a pretty hefty wind coming out of Kotzebue Sound and the Arctic there, heading southward. Out across the central and western Aleutians, scattered snow showers will be possible there. As we head into tomorrow, look for that to continue with low pressure working its way into the Kuskokwim Bay and out around Bristol Bay. 952 to about 953 millibar low. Two circulations here. This is just overall one big storm, and as it works its way northward, you can see that hefty southerly flow working its way into the interior of Alaska. With that, again, comes an opportunity for some snow. Some of that may accumulate around the Fort Yukon and the Yukon Flats, points west. Heavier rainfall for Prince William Sound as a frontal boundary works its way across the Kenai Peninsula. Some of the rain may break up a little bit during the day, but during this period, there may be some very strong winds. And in the Portage Valley and Turnagain Arm and the upper hillside, once again, we can expect some of those gusts to be upwards of 75 to 90 miles per hour. And sustained winds could be as high as 45 to about 60. So plan on some wind. If you've got some time tonight would be a good time to kind of scour out the neighborhood or perhaps your own backyard and just make sure that there's nothing loose that could fly around and damage other parts of your property. For southeast, gusty winds will be possible as well. A main feature will be some of the heavier rainfall expected over the next 24 to 48 hours. You can see that spreading northward, and by Saturday, the entire storm system has made its way a lot more into the interior and the north slope. It still has quite a bit of moisture wrapped up into it. The main core of the low is out across the west coast at 961 millibars. but don't let the number fool you. Even though this is filling in somewhat, it still packs a pretty hefty west and southwesterly punch. There will be a lot of wind across the Seward Peninsula, and Nome will be looking at a pretty healthy south and easterly flow. The frontal boundary across the Brooks Range shows a number of circulations along that. That, too, will enhance the opportunity for snow. And the Arctic coast and Barrow will be looking at accumulating snow and some pretty gusty winds as we go through Saturday and into Sunday before this thing starts to move on and shift a little bit. Trough of low pressure sitting across the Gulf will bring snow, mixed precipitation, and rainfall to parts of south central. It looks like primarily rain across the lower terrain at the Cook Inlet and surrounding regions, including the Mat-Su and the Anchorage Bowl. Parts of the Kenai Peninsula will be looking at rain and snow, including parts around Turnagain Pass. So again, snow conditions at elevation and even lower will be, well, in jeopardy and pretty soggy, it looks like. So if you've got a favorite backcountry area where you like to take your snow machine or perhaps just the backcountry skis, things are going to be changing a little bit in some of your favorite ski locations, whether that's the interior, south central, or even southeast, with periods of rainfall continuing there through the weekend. Gusty winds likely for the central and western parts of the Aleutians. For Nunivak Island and the Pribilofs, expect periods of snow and wind to continue well into the weekend. And looking to the south, other interactions with low pressure just south of Alaska will also keep waves of moisture working in from south to north. So by and large, this is not done. Looks like once we get into Sunday and Monday, there's several reinforcing opportunities for more wet and unusually warm weather to work their way into Alaska. Now, speaking of warm, today was one of those days with temperatures back in the mid-40s for southeast. Juneau was around 45 at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Prince William Sound in the 30s and 40s. You can see Cordova at 45 degrees. A soggy day there with more than 7/10 of an inch of precipitation. Yakutat saw over an inch and a half. Kodiak 37 up around the Susitna Valley. Temps made it to at or maybe above freezing for a little while. About 31 or so in Anchorage with dense fog in some parts of town earlier. And looking northward into the Tanana Valley around Fairbanks, single digits, low to mid-teens there. Healy was showing 15 degrees, 16 in Eagle. Farther north still, you'll notice temperatures take a tumble, so certainly the warmth isn't there yet, but you can see temps across the midsections of the interior had seen some pretty major improvement from some of their colder, frostier levels earlier this week. Anywhere from 25 to about 44 below across the Arctic coast today. 44 below was at Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse. 29 below in Kaktovik. Barrow was showing 36 below. Seward Peninsula anywhere from 17 below at Tin City, and Shishmaref to about 3 above there in Nome. Norton Sound temperatures were hovering fairly close to zero. Bethel was looking at temps in the low to mid-teens. South and western parts of Alaska in the low to mid-30s there around Bristol Bay, 36 in Dillingham, 34 in King Salmon. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. The central Aleutians in the low 30s. Shemya showing 31. The Pribilofs are holding in the upper teens. Overnight low temperatures will stay in the 20s and 30s for the Chain and the Alaska Peninsula. Single digits there for Bethel at 7. Unalakleet looking at 3, 12 below in Nome. Most of the Seward Peninsula will be sub-zero. The Arctic coast from 25 to about 35 below. And when you get toward Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay, temperatures there could be as cold as 40 below with pretty chilly wind conditions there as well. 8 above in Fairbanks. South Central looking at temps at or just above freezing in some cases there, especially once the wind picks up. And upper 30s and lower 40s for Southeast with highs tomorrow in the mid-40s to some areas approaching 50 degrees, including Sitka, Ketchikan, Annette, maybe even areas out toward the coast. Yakutat's probably about 43 degrees. Juneau about the same. Upper 30s to low 40s for South Central. Again, the warmth spreading northward fairly quickly, and around Fairbanks temperatures there could approach the freezing point. You'll notice many areas north of the Yukon looking at single-digit temps, maybe even low 20s. The Arctic coast rebounding as well, back into the 15 to 25 below range. Barrow 22 below, 9 above in Nome. Southwestern parts of Alaska in the 20s and 30s. Here's a look at flying weather now, and you'll notice a wide swath of IFR conditions up and down the west coast, covering the Seward Peninsula, the Alaska Peninsula, and the eastern parts of the Chain. We're also expecting IFR conditions across parts of the western Susitna and eastern Alaska range as we go through the day tomorrow. There will be a lot of changes during the next 24 to 48 hour period, so just because something looks clear for the next 12 hours in the forecast. Again, the next model run may shift the storm just a little bit, so be prepared for rapidly changing conditions in all parts of Alaska, especially closer and closer to the storm and the coastlines here that will see the greatest interaction with moisture and that storm lift. Here's your pass conditions as we see it right now. Anaktuvuk Pass expected to be VFR in the morning, but shifting toward MVFR conditions. The same goes for Adigan Pass throughout the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see that lean over toward IFR conditions there. There's going to be a lot of turbulence in the region as well as icing potential for many parts of the state. Rainy Pass, IFR conditions throughout your Friday. Windy Pass, we expect it to be marginal through most of the day. There may be some changes toward VFR during the daytime there tomorrow. Isabel Pass, likely VFR to start, but heading toward MVFR conditions as the day goes on. Mentasta Pass may lean over toward marginal conditions as we go through your Friday. Tanita Pass, likely marginal conditions through the end of the week, and Portage Pass, at least IFR to start. Maybe some improvements toward MVFR, but again, with the wind and probably the icing potential, flying through Portage may be pretty tricky tomorrow. Chilkoot and White Pass expected to be MVFR. Freezing levels now. This is a map that we can always turn to see what on earth is going on with the crazy weather right now. And freezing levels aloft are marked in red. At the surface, you can see the white line digging southward across the central Aleutians, and it's trying to be nudged northward across the southern coastline, Bristol Bay, and southeast. But beating it to the punch is the warm air aloft. And look at that, running right up into the upper Kuskokwim and lower to mid-Yukon Valley. 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 foot freezing levels there. That warm and wet air coming up, and over top of that is feeding not only the risk for some freezing rain in some places like we're seeing in Southwest, but it's also really moistening the atmosphere fairly quickly and making it much easier not only to have rain and snow, but eventually all rain across the southern coastline and into the Cook Inlet interior and parts of southeast. So a very warm and wet air mass for the season. Icing potential, it's everywhere, and wrapping around the storm you can see pockets of occasional to widespread moderate below 13,000 feet, above 6,000 feet. That's in the interior now. For St. Matthew and the Pribilofs below 7,000 feet. Across southwest and south central Alaska below 10,000, maybe above 4,000 feet in some cases, and a little bit farther out toward Kodiak below 8,000 and above 3,000 feet. Probably not a huge icing threat just yet across southeast, but it is coming your way. Here's a jet stream and a huge trough digging across the Bering and the North Pacific there, feeding into a pretty hefty ridge across the west coast and a large part of Alaska with those stronger southerly winds at 150 knots. 9,000 feet, here's our circulation in the core. The wind speeds 60 knots across the Gulf. A steady southerly flow coming into southeastern Alaska with an east to westerly wind across the Brooks Range. And at 3,000 feet, you can see that circulation a little bit more to the east and south, but still the overall circulation is the same. Rough and tumble weather if you're flying at 3,000 feet for the interior, with wind speeds there at 40 knots. Across the Aleutians, 20 to 30 knots. Here's a look at turbulence, and we do expect at least occasional or maybe even widespread moderate across parts of Kodiak Island, southwestern parts of Alaska below 8,000 feet and below 4,000 feet for the Aleutians. I do expect parts of south and east to see you know what? Actually, I'm going to apologize. This is yesterday's map. This is not correct. We do expect probably isolated severe across some parts of south central and southwestern Alaska. So ignore this here, but a large part of Alaska at least under moderate turbulence, especially near the coast and the range. And we do expect at least some cases of isolated severe. So check with the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit online. You can always find that link on the left-hand side of your screen. We're going to skip on to the ice edge now, continue with our marine weather forecast. The ice edge is likely going to be moving southward in the next several days thanks to that continued northerly flow coming out of the Bering and the Arctic. Meanwhile, the ice across Cook Inlet, we'll get the latest update tomorrow, will likely suffer somewhat thanks to the stronger southerly flow. And as that continues, watch for a better chance to move around in the Cook Inlet there. However, it looks like many areas in southeast, in south central, will be looking at least storm force winds here in the next 24 hours. Southeast, though, the winds mainly picking up across the coastal sections, anywhere from 35 to 40 knots. 16 to 20 foot seas are expected on Friday. In the inner channels, that could run as low as 3 feet in the north and 7 feet in the south, closer to the Dixon entrance. Winds will subside a little bit as we get into Saturday. A 35-knot wind steady from the south with a 7-foot sea there. A little shift there around Stevens Passage in the inner channels. And a southerly flow coming up the coastline there with seas running anywhere from 16 feet in the south to 17 feet as you get into the northern entrances and out toward Icy Cape. Across south central, look at the winds blasting into Prince William Sound. Storm force winds there inside and outside of Prince William Sound tomorrow. 13-foot seas on the inside, 22-foot seas on the outside. It will not be a pretty day anywhere around Prince William Sound, and that includes rain as well. 50-knot winds blowing in past the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay and into the Cook Inlet region. 50-knot winds will bring 19 to 22-foot seas there on either side of Kodiak Island. Winds coming in from 40 to 45 knots, and a northeasterly flow coming down Cook Inlet tomorrow. 25 to as high as 40 knots as it passes Kenai. As you look at Saturday, the winds will subside and switch around again to the south and southwest around Kodiak, a 35-knot wind with 20-foot seas. Southerly still coming into Prince William Sound with a decent push of 4 to 18-foot seas expected there. Outside Resurrection Bay, a 19-foot sea on a 35-knot wind from the south. Across the Alaska Peninsula, notice the winds rotating around here. A southeasterly flow north of Chignik and out toward Kodiak Island. Easterlies inside Bristol Bay with a 10-foot sea, and westerlies south of Sandpoint with a 20-foot sea expected there for Friday. As we get into Saturday, you'll notice a little bit more of a south and westerly flow. 30 to 40-knot winds are expected there, moving right back into the system across the Gulf. Northwesterly winds there on Friday. 40 to 45-knot winds are expected from Nikolsky to Unalaska, south of Adak and Aka. A 30-knot wind there with an 11-foot sea. Some of the higher seas there south of Nikolsky and Unalaska. Freezing spray will be an issue there with northwesterly winds across the western parts of the chain. An 11-foot sea is expected there on Friday. And by Saturday, 25-knot winds there out around Kiska and Attu, with a west and southwesterly flow returning to the central and eastern parts of the chain, watching for freezing spray around Nikolsky, Dutch Harbor, and Unalaska again into Saturday. Across the west coast, a northerly wind will be setting up, 45 to 50 knots there. Storm force winds in some cases with a southeasterly flow outside of Kuskokwim Bay. For the Pribilofs, a northerly wind at 40 knots will switch around to a southwesterly wind at 40 knots with a 17-foot sea by Saturday, and strong gales continue in the north. Across the Arctic coast, a north and easterly flow switches around to more of a stronger northerly flow, pushing toward the Bering Strait at 45 knots off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. Blizzard conditions may be possible there, and a very strong northeasterly flow coming through Saturday. 30 to 45 knots there, coming down the Chukchi seacoast and into Kotzebue Sound at 45 knots from the northeast as well. Recapping tonight's weather, a powerful storm system moving out of the Pacific will move toward Bristol Bay, and as it does so, it's bringing a healthy dose of warm and wet air to many parts of Alaska. For the Gulf Coast, that means periods of heavy rain and snow switching over to rain. Strong and gusty winds for the Portage Valley. Gusts there could reach upwards of 90 miles per hour. Blizzard conditions may develop as we head into Friday and Saturday for the interior, and the west coast is under a winter storm warning where 5 to 10 inches of snow may be possible as we get into Friday and Saturday. Consult weather.gov anytime. We'll see you right back here for more Alaska weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.